Yo, what up, Street Talks? There, Kim. So, another thought. This one's about low-key racism. So, this is okay. This is just a thought. So, you know, so this is something I find very interesting. Whenever we're at the gym, and then I could deadlift over 4 plates or whatever, everyone's always so shocked. And I'm very honored. I'm like, yo, I take that as a compliment. And people are like, oh, because you look like a skinny dude, or you're like a little bit more on the slender side, and the fact that you can lift it, I'm like, yo, that's totally legitimate. I thank you for that, and I appreciate that. But what's the problem is, honestly, the biggest issue is that I think when people say that, oh, Eric, you're so strong, how'd you do that, yo, I think it's actually low-key racism. So what I mean by that, I mean is this. When you're essentially a low-key racist, so first and foremost, what is racism? So my thought about racism is thinking that a certain genetic race or stock or ethnicity, whatever, is genetically inferior in terms of physical strength, mental strength, abilities, ingenuity, and so forth. Now, how does this manifest itself in the real world? So, let me just give you a practical example. So, people go up to me and they're like, whoa, Eric, you're so strong, or whoa, you're so strong, and people are shocked. But let's say I was African American or Caucasian, would people be as shocked? They might still be shocked, but not as shocked. Why is that? Because society has conditioned us to thinking Asian men are less masculine and are of a lesser genetic stock than, let's say, African American men or Caucasian men, whatever. And so I was thinking, I had that epiphany, I'm like, oh shit. Yeah, dude, the world is low-key racist. And also not only that, but I've been low-key racist to myself the whole time too. So for example, growing up, it's like, okay, if you're an Asian American guy, it's like Asian guys are always teased for having small dicks, right? And it's funny because I Googled this, right? Studies are inconclusive, but let's say for just example's sake, let's actually say that on average, let's say you took all the ethnicities in the world, and let's say with 100% accuracy, you could measure all the guys' dick sizes, and you did find that on average, Asian men have smaller penis sizes than, let's say, African American men. But then it's also tricky too, because do Asian American men have smaller penis sizes than African American men? Or what's the size of a Asian American guy versus an East Asian guy in the neighboring country, or whatever it may be? So this is the problem with averages. Averages don't actually always apply to the individual. For example, on average, the NBA is mostly African American guys, right? So one might extrapolate and say, because the NBA is mostly African American men, if you're not an African American, you're probably not going to make it. And if you're Asian, you can't make it because it's mostly African American guys. And African American men are physically superior to Asian guys, both in strength, height, blah, blah, blah. But we don't really, us humans, we're so basic, we don't really think about the outliers. So for example, Yao Ming, I think he was 7'6"? He was actually taller than Shaq. So there's actually a good video on YouTube of, the first time Shaq plays against Yao Ming. And dude, man, I've always loved Shaq, and I still think I love Shaq. But dude, this guy was so racist. He was straight up he's like, what do you think about Yao Ming? He was like, ching chong something, whoa! pro or something like that. So, but the good thing is after he played against Yao and whatever, ultimately Shaq got respect for Yao. He said, Yao, me, and two other people are actually the only great players of this generation. And so through Yao's determination and not getting bullied around, he was able to get the respect of Shaq and the rest of the world. But anyways, so taking it back to this notion. So Yao Ming is the outlier, right? Asian dude, 7'6", probably tallest guy in the NBA. So the question is, the problem with statistics and just society and the way we tend to think of things, we always think about the averages and the mean. We never think about the outliers. And this is important because modern day utilitarian society says we should care about the averages, not the outliers. So this is actually very anti what I believe in. I personally believe that society thrives through a few great individuals. Like individuals are the prime movers. Obviously, like everyone works together and you need teams, whatever, but still you do need the one determination of a certain leader, general, thought leader, whatever it may be. And so even this notion of like, Asian guys aren't as strong as, let's say, African American men or Caucasian men is, this is my thought. I don't actually think it's a genetic thing. I think it's more of just like a cultural thing. So for example, Asian guys or Asian men are encouraged by our Asian parents generally to study hard, don't play sports, academics over everything. And where do we get this? We get this from Confucius, Confucianism. It's all about that, right? But let's say, you're African American or you're Caucasian. Then let's say, depending obviously on the culture you're raised in, let's say they stress academics, but they're also like, yo, you can play sports if you want to. Because like at least for my generation, I was born in 1988. Even now in Asia, it's like kids aren't really encouraged to play sports, especially Asian American guys, right? But like, let's say, hypothetical situation. Let's say you took the whole world and you just gave everyone one culture, right? Like the whole world had just a single culture. Everyone had the same training, regardless of age, race, sex, whatever. Then we could actually judge like what's really going to happen. Obviously, this will never really happen, but maybe this is actually my working theory. Obviously, there's genetic differences. So, for example, a guy who's 7 foot tall, 350 pounds, obviously is going to be stronger than me, right? But I almost wonder, it's like we should think less about racial differences and think maybe more about like genetic differences, because like even like as Asians or Asian American men, right? This is also another problem. A lot of our parents grew up in like times of famine or war or poverty and stuff like that. Like even my mom, she kind of grew up like tail end of the Korean War. A lot of Chinese people, their parents grew up in the Cultural Revolution. So when they were kids growing up, they weren't able to eat a lot of meat and have enough nutrition. So even for myself, like I'm actually the tallest person in my whole family. I'm like 5'10". And so I wonder, like, if all my uncles, aunts, and grandparents and stuff, they all had the same access to the same American nutrition I did, with like hot pockets and Costco pizzas or whatever, and hamburgers. What genetic potential could we have hit? And so like I actually have good faith that like even my future kids are probably going to be taller and more superior to me. But anyways, and I was lucky too. Once again, I was born in the States. I loved meat as a kid growing up. I ate a lot of it, and so I was able to gain more of my genetic potential than others. But anyways, so taking it back to the low-key racism thing, and then I thought about let me not speak too much about other races because I can't really speak for their experiences. I'm just gonna talk more about the Asian American experience. Is that like, as an Asian American dude, you're always taught to feel some sort of inferiority bias, like, yo, you got a small dick, and they kind of like, so like even for myself, I had like kind of a chip on my shoulder, so even in high school, I ended up playing football, like American football. I was, I think sophomore year, I was outside linebacker. Junior year, I was middle linebacker. And, I tried to engage in like strength training and stuff like that. And, even growing up, like my favorite characters were always like, even in basketball, I wanted to play center. I wanted to be dominant. And like, even for and this is actually something that is interesting because also generally too, like culturally, Asian men are seen as shy and reserved and not so outspoken. So a lot of people often just, like, especially when I'm traveling or even in the States, people are shocked by me because like, yo, an Asian dude with like so much like, chutzpah or like kind of like, it's just like really audacious or speaks his mind or speaks loud. He's just like, he won't censor himself or he's not PC or whatever. So like a lot of people kind of get confused because like, what? Like random Asian dude who, talks this way, acts this way, whatever. So a lot of people's confused by me. And I think once again, it is like, essentially a low-key racism because the racist notion is Asian men are genetically less masculine than other races, and that's just in their blood. And that's why when Asian men are audacious or bold or, say things that are kind of crazy in your face or, Asian guys who are more aggressive or whatever, it's kind of seen as like shocking because Asian men are generally seen as more effeminate. Right? And even like you see this trend, and this is also another bad thing too, right? This is kind of talking about like self-racism, is that like, this is what it's in my mind, right? In terms of the racial hierarchy of guys. So on the top, it's probably like, in terms of masculinity, like probably like African American, Caucasian, maybe Latino, then Asian, then like Indian, South Asian. I think that's kind of what's been the general sense. Because like even amongst us, so I'm Korean American, right? So we're technically considered East Asian, not just, I say Asian because that's what I grew up with, but technically we're East Asian because if you're from like India and stuff like that, you're technically South Asian as well. Because I actually remember one of my best friends growing up, Aditya, he's South Asian, right? And then like he'd be hanging out with me and the homeboys. We're all like Korean, Chinese, whatever. And he's like, hey guys, I'm Asian too. And we're like, what are you talking about? It's like, shows us a map. It's like, you see India, this whole continent, that's Asia. And we're like looking at the map borders, we're like, he's right. We're like, you're not Asian, you're Indian, get out of here, right? So once again, it's this unfortunate hierarchy that like everyone's always just trying to shit on each other and everyone's trying to gain some sort of like hierarchy. And I do think that I do think that in society there should be forms of social hierarchy. Like you probably don't want a bozo on top. You probably want more intellectual people on top. But I don't think we should rank intellectuality or courage or masculinity or femininity, blah blah, based on race, based on your skin pigment, your facial morphology, the way you look. Like even it's kind of sad too, because like I actually remember, so when I was at UCLA, I took an African American studies class, and apparently even in the African American community, if you're a darker toned male, you're seen as more dominant and more masculine. But if you're a lighter skinned male, you're seen as more effeminate and whatever, and you're seen less African American. Whereas if you're a woman, if you're darker skin tone, that's seen as a negative thing. Whereas if you're a woman, African American, you have a lighter skin tone, like Beyonce, that's kind of seen as a good thing. So yeah, like racism, isms are all just kind of ugly. And I really do believe in the human thriving. I don't think none of ourselves should be limited based on any ism, sexism, classism, ethnicityism, whatever ism it may be. I think it should just come down to our individual courage, our appetite for risk-taking, and just, like our strength, our mental fortitude, and so forth. So, the point of this video is that there's lots of high-key forms of racism where there's it's just blatantly obvious, right? It's y'all a bunch of ching chong motherfuckers, right? That's high-key racist, right? But then once again, it's tricky because someone could be joking, and actually not be. So this is where racism is interesting, right? Is that it's one thing to tease people and it's one thing to be stereotyping. I don't think that's always racism. Racism is, to be very clear, my definition, it's when you think that somebody's intelligence, physical abilities, or their intellectuality is genetically inferior to other people or you based on whatever, or if you think your genetic abilities, your intellect, your whatever, is superior to other races, that's also racism too. I think it was, I don't know if it's Steven Pinker or somebody or another scholar, I don't want to misquote, but essentially trying to do some I saw this from Nassim Taleb, which is interesting, is some sort of random article he did that saying Ashkenazi Jewish people have some sort of genetic mutation which helps them become more intelligent than others, and I'm yo, that's low-key racism, because he's essentially making the claim that Ashkenazi Jews, might be intellectually superior to other genetic races purely by genetics. And this gets very dangerous, because to think that your intellect is based on your genetics, it's kind of some scary shit. But so we also have to be afraid of that, or even when people say Asian people are good at math, that's also kind of a dangerous notion, because good for Asian people who want to become accountants, but it's bad for everyone else, because if we say Asian people are better than math than the rest of us, and we think that's a genetic ability, right? Not a cultural training, because actually Asians do get more cultural training with maths and stuff. Then let's say you're an employer, you're less likely to hire a Latino person or even a Caucasian or African American, because you're oh, Asians are the apex of mathematics, and therefore, so once again, we have to be very careful of all forms of kind of low-key racism. So I think the best way to start off is just be honest with yourself. Even with myself, there's that song, everyone's a little bit racist. It's true, right? I'm racist, I'm sexist, I'm classist, and sometimes I know it is, that I am, but sometimes it's low-key, it's hidden somewhere deep in my subconscious. So but it's really sad, and I think it's trying to deprogram our prejudices to remain open-minded, and to essentially just kind of question, ourselves. Even for myself, let's say if I meet somebody from the South and they have a Southern twang, my intuitive gut reaction is, oh, this person is probably less intelligent because he has a certain accent. Or, this is actually where I noticed that I could be a little bit sexist too, is that let's say I meet a woman, right? And then talking about technical matters with cameras, whatever. My intuitive sexism is that I think that women are less tech savvy than men. And that's definitely sexist. So I try not to think that no more. And so just trying to get rid of my own isms. And also towards myself too, because truth be told, I still do have a little bit of chip on my shoulder, being an Asian American dude in American society. And this funny thing too is, ultimately at the end of the day, I don't even see myself as Asian. I'm just I'm just Eric, or I'm an American, or whatever it may be. And so, let us stop being prejudiced against ourselves. Let us stop being, have an ism towards ourselves with our background, our age, our race, our sex, our gender, our orientation, whatever it may be. Let us see programmed ourselves in us. And then let's kind of Like, don't check other people because I feel like that's bad manners. Let's check ourselves and be on the lookout for low-key racism, especially within yourself.